Hey everybody, it's been a little while since I've done a YouTube video for English paper piecing, and I thought I would just come in today and talk to you about the basics of English paper piecing and all the little techniques that I use and tips that I use to make life really easy. And especially for those of you who are maybe just starting out and want to give it a go and aren't really sure about whether it's for you or not. I mean, there's some simple little things that you can do and just to try it that's quite inexpensive. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the tools because they're really important. So first of all, English paper piecing is when you're using paper shapes to create a design. So our paper shapes are made with a special card. They're silk coated on both sides, so they're very smooth to the touch, which makes it very easy to remove your papers when you're taking them out after you've finished your quilt. So these are all pre-cut and they are die cut. So they're not laser cut, they're die cut. So each one of your shapes are all exactly the same. If it's, you know, a 1-inch hexagon, or the next 1-inch hexagon will be the same as the first one. So they're nice to the touch and smooth, but the coating is actually on both sides, so it doesn't matter which side you glue on. The other thing that we use is an acrylic template, and that has a 1/4 inch seam allowance around it. So this template is a 1/4 inch bigger than your pre-cut shape. Now the thing with our templates as well, and I'm not sure that many people know about this, is they're dual purpose templates. So these are for English paper piecing, but they're also good for if you're a traditional hand piecer, so you can use them for that, or if you're a machine piecer, you can also cut your shapes out and sew your pieces up on the machine. So they are a dual purpose, and so they're very cost effective. Now, working with English paper piecing shapes, once upon a time we used to tack all of our fabric to the card, and I think some people probably still do that. But a lot of years ago, I introduced the glue pen to the market, and it just saves so much time. It saves me about 75% of time in my preparation, and it's just so easy. But there is a trick to it, and you need to know how to do that, because what happens is often people will use too much glue and then it becomes difficult to get the paper out. So I'm going to show you how to do that and how less glue is better. So the thing that's made English paper piecing really user friendly is the glue pen. It's actually a Sewline glue pen, but they have put my name to it, which is really exciting. So this is an awesome tool. It dries clear, it washes out in water, and it just makes life so much easier. So I was really excited when this all came about many years ago, and you know, made so many more people want to do this technique, because before it was just so time consuming. The other thing you need to think about is needles. Needles are a really important notion. I know a lot of people don't really think about needles, but with English piecing you need to have a nice fine needle. Something that's really fine, that when you're taking your stitches, that it's not taking big chunks of fabric. So if you use a big fat needle, you'll have big fat stitches. So the finer your needle, the finer your work will be. So the milliner's needles, so my preference for English piecing is the milliner's 11. They're Sue Daley brand, and they're quite long. And the reason I like a long needle is because if it's too short, you're hanging onto it so tightly and you end up getting a pain in your arm here. So a longer needle, you can relax a little bit. And yes, they do bend a little bit because they're so fine, but that's often because you're holding them too tightly, and that then creates that pain in your wrist. So you need to relax a little bit and, you know, just enjoy what you're doing. Don't be so tense when you're sewing. So the needles, very important. Now the next thing that over the years I realized that if I was using cotton thread, when I was sewing my pieces together, it was constantly shredding. As I was sewing the pieces and dragging the thread across the card, it would shred, and so therefore it weakens the thread. And seriously, when you make a quilt like this, you want it to stay together for a long time. So the superior bottom line thread was the thread that I found that would not do that. So it is a polyester thread, and I know that for the longest time everybody talks about cotton thread and cotton fabric, which is exactly what we do. But with English piecing, we use a polyester thread because it stops that shredding as you're dragging the thread across the card. Now it's a very fine thread, which works beautifully with the needles because the needles are fine and the thread's fine. They're easier to thread, and the thread will just sink into your fabric. You don't have to color match so much. So normally you would color match your thread to your fabric, but with this you don't need as many colors, and it will just sink in and become invisible into your fabric. So the thread comes in a few different ways you can buy it. So you can get a little 6-pack of bobbins. You can get the Sue Daley selection in a 12-pack. It comes in a 1420 yard reel, or if you're lucky enough to be able to get a donut, they're awesome because it gives you 36 different colors. So the next thing I want to talk about is your cutting surface. So most of you will have a mat. It might be square, it might be rectangular, big, small, it doesn't matter. It'll be a cutting mat. So the little pink mat is a rotating mat, so it's a Sue Daley rotating mat, so it turns very easily. Now, I used to call this a luxury item once, but once you get using it, it's almost a necessity now, I believe. So when you're cutting out, you're putting your fabric down, you're putting your template on, and you can just cut, stand in the same place and cut. Instead of dancing around the table and cutting under your armpit, we can just cut in the one place. So it makes life very easy. And you know, you can cut out on your lap. If you're sitting on a lounge chair, you can put the mat on your lap, and you can cut out on your lap, on your surface, on your table, your sewing table. It's very, very versatile. So it's a great product, and it's very sturdy. So that is one of the things, my favorite tools. A lot of you ask, what type of cutter do you use? Well, my very first cutter was an alpha cutter, and it was a 45mm, and but now I tend to use the 28mm, just because it's a little smaller and it's quite easy to carry around. You know, I'm traveling a lot, so it's quite easy to put in my kit and for traveling. So it's really up to you. It's up to, you know, perhaps the size of your hand even, or just what you're comfortable with. But at the moment I like the 28mm, but if you've got a 45, that's okay too. Some of you might even have a 60mm. That's also okay. So the other thing, the last thing I want to talk to you about today is these little quilt clips. So you'll see these, they're called quilt clips, they're called binding clips, and people use them for a variety of things. But what I've found is that when you're putting your pieces together and you're holding them with your hand, we tend to grip it quite tightly like we do with our needle, and we hold it quite tightly, which again can affect your wrist in here if you're doing that constantly. So if you were to clip your pieces together with a little quilting clip, that will hold it. It's a bit of a head thing, and in your head you know that it's clipped, it's not going to move, so you tend to relax a little more, so you're not gripping onto it so tightly. And that's really important. We need to take care of our wrists. So these little quilting clips are a must-have when you're doing English paper piecing. It will just make your life easier. That's it for the notions right now. So I'm going to now move into showing you just how to do some basic English piecing, some gluing and some stitching, so you can see the finer points of that. So I just want to go through some of the basics for English paper piecing, some of the little tips that are going to help you along your journey. So first of all, cutting. You're going to need some fabric. So good quality quilter's cotton or patchwork fabric from your local patchwork store. You can cut one shape at a time if you want to, but I like to cut, you know, many layers at a time. So if I'm not fussy cutting, I'll cut several layers together. If I'm fussy cutting, it will be just one layer at a time. So this is not a fussy cutting fabric, so I would just layer this up, and I'm going to just fold it so I can cut through 4 layers at once. So you can just pop your template on there onto your fabric, and I'm going to just cut. So as you can see, the mat, I'm just turning it as I'm cutting. And there we have 4 pieces all at once. Okay, so your cutting can be quite quick if you want to cut through several layers at a time. So I can pop that over there. Take the scraps out. Okay, the next thing is we're going to glue. So when you're gluing, we're going to use the glue pen, and I'm going to show you how to do that using less glue, making it much easier for you to get your papers out. Okay, so we're going to glue one of these shapes. So you're going to take one of your paper shapes, and these are 1-inch hexagons, so you're measuring along one edge here. So that's 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch. So a hexagon has 6 sides, so we have 1 inch on each side. It's coated on both sides, so it doesn't matter which side you place facing up. Pop your paper down onto your fabric, and we've got our glue pen. Just wind it up, and we're going to use the edge of our glue pen, and we're going to glue in from the edge a little bit. So this is the edge of our paper, and we're going to glue along the paper but away from the edge. You don't want to glue right close to the edge. If you glue right close to the edge here, the glue gets all caught up in there. When you go to sew your papers together, then it's quite hard to put your needle through the glue. So just along the edge, away from the very edge, a tiny wee bit on that piece of fabric that you've already folded over, and it's quite quick. Pull it in nice and firm. Make sure your points are all nice and tight. So you can see these are all nice and tight around here, and everything's glued down nicely. Okay, so that's your gluing. So you do a few of those. Now some of you might want to do this. You might just want to pop a tiny bit of glue onto the back of your card, put it down so it doesn't move. This is really helpful if you're fussy cutting, if you fussy cut your fabric and you don't want your paper to move. So that will hold it in place, and then you can just quickly go around and glue. So you can see I'm not using very much glue at all. And then we have two nice and sharp points. Make sure they're all pulled down nice and tight at your points here. Okay, so there we have two of those. Now I'm going to show you how to sew those together. Okay, so I've glued some of these hexagons around, and we're just going to make a little hexagon flower. So for a hexagon flower you need a center one and then 6 to go around the outside, so 7 in total. So we're going to take the center one, and then I'm going to sew my hexagons around the outside of the center one. So I'll pick the center one up, and then I'm going to put my petals right side down onto the center. Okay, so I'm going to take my needle. So we've got our milliner's 11, which is quite long. We've got our superior bottom line thread. I'm just going to put a little quilter's knot in the end of the thread. Okay, now I'm going to come up between the card and the fabric right here. So I'm going to send my needle through to the point, and I'm going to lose my knot into that seam allowance. And it just holds it there while I sew this together. So I'm going to take a stitch, take one stitch, then I'm going to come in for a second stitch. Now when I'm taking that stitch, I'm actually taking about 2 threads of fabric of the green and 2 threads of the pink. Don't just pick up one thread either side, because what that will happen is that the thread will pull out of your fabric, and your seams open up when you finish sewing them. So just go a little deeper in there. Now we've gone in and I've taken that second stitch, and I'm going to do a knicker knot. So you can see this thread at the front, and there's 2 threads at the back here coming out of the eye of the needle. We're going to go under to the left and to the back, and these 2 will come forward and go under to the right and to the back, and it forms a little figure 8 there, and that's the knot that locks everything off. So you want to start with that knot, and you want to finish with that knot. Then we're going to sew along the top. So this is where this quilting clip comes into play, right here. So you can put it down low, and it holds everything together, and that means I don't have to grip this so tightly. I can relax a little bit now. So we're going to stitch, and we're taking about 2 threads of green and 2 threads of pink as we're sewing across the top, and we're going to do our stitches about a 1/16 of an inch apart, or 1.5 mm. And you're going to sew from back to front and go straight. So you're sewing from here to here, and you can see my needle is coming straight through it that way. That means the stitch in there on the other side that's the shortest distance. So if you sew that way, there's less likelihood that you're going to see any stitches on the right side. If you sew on an angle like that, then your stitches are longer and you'll see them on the right side of your work. So as you're sewing this together, make sure you pull your thread nice and firmly. Okay, and then I'm just going to show you, when you open that up, you don't see any stitching on the right side of your work. So it's all very neat. what I would do then is I would just keep sewing right to the end of that row. And I always sew all my hexagons around in with one thread if I can. So all the outside hexagons go around the inside hexagon, but I try and just use one thread. So I come to that last stitch and I'm going to put a second stitch right there at the point. I can take this off and we have that. So the next one I'm going to sew in is going to go from here to here. So to do that, I need to travel my thread up behind. I'm just going to travel it up in there, come out at the point, and then I can put my next hexagon in. So I'm going to put it on top, pink one on top of the pink one. I'm going to do 2 stitches here at the point. And then I'm going to come down this next side. And when I get down to this end here, we're going to put another 2 stitches at the point. Just make sure your thread doesn't come out of your needle. And I'm going to do those 2 stitches right at the point here. So this is your Y seam basically. So you've got 2 stitches there, then you're going to open it up and we're going to refold it, and we can bend this one here. Don't be afraid to bend your papers. And then we're going to do 2 stitches at that Y seam right at the point, and then we're going to come down that next seam. And you're going to continue like that until you get them all on. So as I sew along here, I'm going to sew right along to the end there, do 2 stitches, run my thread up the back here, right through up to the back, come out at the point, and then sew my next one in. And I'll do that all the way around. When you come to the last hexagon, you'll sew that in 3 seams. The last little bit you do, you'll sew 3 seams this way. And that way you've got them all on, all with one thread. And so you're not cutting and starting again over and over. So there you have it. And so this is what it will look like when you're done. So it's all nice. No stitches showing through on the right side. And it's all nice and neat at the back as well. And all of those seams will just lay flat forever in behind your quilt. So the next thing is we need to take the paper out. So when you're making a big quilt, you can leave your papers in and make sure you, before you start taking any papers out, make sure the paper you're going to take out has papers around it. So I can take this center paper out, but I can't take any of the others out yet. So to do that, I'm just going to turn it over. I'm going to just flick the edges back. And because I haven't used much glue, I can just get my thumb in there, rip it out like a band-aid. I always call it the band-aid effect. And you can see that the papers, they can be reused again very easily because there's not too much glue on there and it came out all intact. So that's as easy as it is to get the paper out. So then you can make lots of these and you can applique them onto a background, or you can sew them together into a grandma's flower quilt. But remember, don't take the paper out until you have papers all the way around. So that's it for the basics of English paper piecing. I hope you enjoyed that and I hope you've learned a little bit, and I hope it helps you along the way with your journey. That's it from me today, and I'll see you soon.